Whoa! Echo! Echo! We'll give this a shot. Anyway, what I was doing was I was playing a game called Farm Simulator 19 for a PlayStation. On the colder days, I seem to have some time and less ambition to go outside and work, so I play some video games. And what I noticed was it's the same thing that reminds me of a Twilight Zone from years and years ago, where a guy had to wish to go back in time because he said it wasn't being on top that's the most fun, it's getting there that's the most fun. And farming simulators are very much the same way. Building the farm is a lot more fun than operating it in the long term, because once it gets running, it kind of gets redundant. And what I'm doing is I'm in the process of rebuilding or reclaiming or cleaning up, restarting. I don't know what the term is. I moved on to a family farm that's been homesteaded maybe 140 years ago or more. And along with that comes with a lot of junk. Another issue is that the farm went idle for a few years. And I don't blame anyone for that. Probably I could blame myself, actually. Between my brothers and I, no one showed a lot of interest in farming. And we went off to college. We did our own thing for a while. My dad rented out some row crops. We never upgraded the equipment. And so things kind of lost its momentum. And the thing about losing momentum is getting momentum back takes a lot of work. And that's where I'm at now. And that's where I've been pretty much for like the last 5 years or so. And on top of that, I've also started a family, which trying to start a family and a farm at the same time, as well as work a full-time job. It's, well, let's say, you know, I had more hair a long time ago, before all this. So maybe that kind of gives you some suggestion or idea of what I've been going through. But what I thought would be fun is with 2020, I've been able to kind of get a little bit more aggressive. I took out some loans, I've been doing some upgrading. I'm gonna sort of set the tone for 2020 now so we can all see what happens by the end of the year. If the wind gets real bad, then I'll probably just shoot the video and then do a voiceover in the house with better audio. All right, so let's go. Okay, so as I started shooting that video, it turned out there's a lot of wind. And additionally, it seemed like the video became much longer than I anticipated. So I'm going to split this into 3 different videos. One of the farm place, one of the fields that we farmed. They're all hay fields. Everything that is row crops, my dad rented out years ago, and we've just been doing it that way. So there's only a hay field, pastures. So we got farm place, fields, and then the equipment. And what I want to do is create the same sensation or observational sense of playing something like Farm Simulator, where you get a kind of entire image of how the operation goes, and then you can solicit your ideas or suggestions as far as like which direction to go or recommending things, because I'm open to advice, maybe some criticism too if it's like done in a sort of I can take a few jabs, but sometimes I don't know with text-based communication if it's a joke or someone's just like, I don't know. You've seen the types online. We don't know. We don't need to go into details. Okay, so anyway, we will start off with the fields. All right, so this field, we're looking at this section right here. This is about 40 acres. So this is a 40-acre plot. And I call this the folks field. It's the field closest to my parents. And what we have here is 24 acres of grass right there. The problem is, I call it 24 acres because it's actually just, I'll show you. It's actually 24 acres right here, this section there. And I'll take these highlights away. The problem we have is this is a hillside up here. This is bottom ground. And we have like this really marshy area where Reed's canary grass grows. And I think it's starting to spread this way. So sometimes we'll cut this area separate from up here. And this area, these are all cut together. And it's turned into square bales, while this stuff down here turns into Reed's canary bales. We tend to round bale into Reed's canary. The thing with this canary grass is it's real coarse. If you cut it early enough, you can probably sell it off for some feed. If it's cut too late, it's very, very coarse, not very palpable for animals, and certainly not palpable for horses. So anyway, so we have that area. I call this the marsh. We got about 7 acres of marsh right there. We got 24 acres that we do into hay right there. And then we have 8 acres right here that we thought about taking back it's rented out to some neighbors. We thought about taking it back and putting some alfalfa and grass right here because we're having this drainage issue that every year that it seems we get a lot of water, this starts getting eaten away and the dirt moves away. And they try to fill it in or they try to push dirt back, but it never really is a permanent solution. And ideally, grass established right here would probably be the ideal scenario for controlling the erosion. So we have 24 acres right about here. And that's what I call the folks area. 24, about 7, about 8. And there's maybe a few, there's like an acre that's kind of, to make it a full 40, I might not be including a few areas over here to make it the full 40 acres, but it's 40 acres. These fields I call Creek North and Creek South. Obviously, it's along a creek and it's got some weird angles. This is kind of problematic for when you want to use a bale wagon. Bale wagons are ideally set up for long straight lines. And I have to do a little bit of creative turning and curving here. And I've gotten pretty well where I can pick up bales on a curve because there's so many in this area. And over here, I'll take these highlights away. What you have like over here is about 7.5 acres. So down here, 7.3. And this area that you can see that's a little different is on the other side of a ditch. It's really hard to get in there. Sometimes we get thistles that start to get established there. And we have to go in with backpack sprayers and we spray them down or chop them down depending on how late in maturity they are. And then we also have a ditch right here that you can't really drive through. You can only go through on this side where the slope is light enough for a tractor to go through. So we actually bale this separate from this side, and this is annoying. There's times I've just driven a flatbed truck in the area and I just load it by hand instead of trying to get a bale wagon to pick up the bales. Same issue kind of arises around here. You got some ditches and culverts that are hard to maneuver around. This area produces really nice grass though, so it's worth our time to cut it. And years ago when we weren't regularly mowing this and we let cattle graze it, they'd overgraze it and it looked kind of rough. But once you let the grass kind of establish itself, it actually turns out pretty well. So we got 7.5 on the north, 7.3 on the south. Okay, I'll show you another field that we do. This is what I call our back field. It's a 7.3 acres. Again, you got some weird curves. You got a high side here. You can kind of tell it's thinner there because it's up on a hill. Plus, I think there's a soil that's got probably more alkali in it, and it doesn't seem to grow back for a second cut very well. The first cut will be okay. Second cut gets a lot sparse. Obviously, you can notice a big difference here. This is the low ground. It floods through this area, and the water will sit here. And if it gets bad enough, this turns into a lake. That moisture creates a really nice dark grass. I got people that specially request this stuff because they seem to notice that their horses eat a lot more of this stuff and they enjoy it. So this is kind of special, but it's very limited. The field's only 7.3 acres, and you're talking about maybe a third of that 7.3 acres that's got some really nice stuff. But that's what we call the back field. Okay, the last field that we do, which is unfortunately the largest and furthest away from all the storage, and it's always a logistical problem to get all this cut at once and put up done the right way, is called the town large, and this is 53 acres. There's also 2.8 acres here in this hourglass shape. That one was a fun one to bale. Even with our smaller hay equipment, this is a nuisance, but the neighbor that rented this from us uses a 16-row corn head as well. I don't know how big his planter is, but I know it's like 3 passes and he's out of there, if that. But the problem is it's hourglass shaped, so it's a real nuisance to try to get that thing planted. And even with our balers, like I said, it's a tricky one to cut because you don't really know which shape. You can do a perimeter cut a couple times, so you got room for a bale wagon if you bring it in there. But last time we just round baled it because it gets congested right here, and then you're doing funny maneuvers with a mower, and it's just unpleasant. But there's grass there. The neighbor that left it was real generous. He had some seed left over in a drill, and he planted some grass there. It might have had some alfalfa mixed into it, but the alfalfa didn't establish. I think it's like a rye grass, possibly. We've only done this field once so far, and I think with regular cutting, it should come back pretty well. I'm optimistic at least. So you got 2.8 acres here, 53 acres here. It's actually 53.9 maybe 8. But once you subtract this area out of it and this area, it goes down to about 53 acres. This is not going to be easy to fill in. That's a pretty deep pond. And then it kind of soaks through this area. That's consistently wet. Sometimes we can get this baled up, but otherwise there's canary grass here and a little bit through there. Also, the problem with this field, this is the one that I actually had to spray before. For the most part, the other fields I haven't had to spray. We can walk through and weed it by hand, and it doesn't take long. It's like maybe a day's worth of work. But this stuff, years ago, we had a flood that took all the round bales off the field. I made a video about it. We had round bales scattered across the field, and that night, the weatherman, like the night we finished the bales, the weatherman was saying, oh, there's a chance for 3/10 of an inch of rain or something like that, some insignificant amount. But then we got a flood. And all the ground up here is up on a higher elevation. So it flooded down this way. And we had 90 bales, I think, scattered through here. And it just rolled them down into this creek and across and under the bridge into a neighbor's field. So we lost like almost the entire crop. And after that flood, we've had problems with horse nettle, which is a horrible weed. And it's a hard one to find the time to spray it correctly, because if you wait too long, it's too tough. If you go too early, then the late sprouters will show up after you sprayed. And if you get a little much too late, you get these berries on them, and it's a nuisance. And it used to start off in patches, but then it started like stringing out. It's a terrible weed, and I don't know the perfect solution to it yet, but intermittent spraying seems to help. And I've even tried to chop it down, but it's just unpleasant. There's no good way around it. But that's our 53 acres plus our 2.8. So let's do some math and see what we got here. I said we had 24 acres at the Folks. We had 7.5 on the creek north. We had 7.3 on the creek south. We have 7.3 in the backfield. And then we have 53 acres in town plus 2 acres next to the field in town, for a total of 101.9 acres of grass hay that we do every summer. It's consistently given us 2 cuts of hay for grass, and I think there's even a time we scraped off a 3rd cut when we're kind of desperate in November once. So it produces well enough, mostly because all this is low ground. A lot of the hay we do is low ground. And people ask us, well, why don't you just rent it out for row crops? Well, because if we rented it out for row crops, it would all be washed away. Everything that you see here has been entirely underwater at one point. Maybe not this part. The other fields are the same way. They'll be entirely underwater during a flood, which, if you've looked at Nebraska over the last year, flooding seems to be a increasing trend. So if you had row crops here with loose soil, I imagine all that soil would go into the creek, and it would not be as productive as we would hope. So we do hay. Plus, it's kind of fun. I enjoy it. I'm going to give you a rough idea as far as the yields on that field. Okay, I don't keep the most accurate numbers on these fields because sometimes we'll cut a part of a field instead of the whole thing. So it's hard to understand how many acres did we cut, how many bales we got off those acres, and then you cut the rest of the field later. The thing we've noticed over the last few years has been you have like a 3 or 4 day window to get your first cut of hay done. The rainy season seems to be getting later and later, and it's just hard to find that dry window of 5 or 6 days to get hay done right. So there's times we'll cut a little bit at a time, and then we'll try to keep it spread out really wide, and then rake it together and bale it as quick as possible within a 3 or 4 day window. And the humidity doesn't always allow that. That being said, I can't give an exact number for every acre on every field because it's not cut that way, and I don't keep the best records. But what I can do is give you an overall end of the year sum. And for this year, we had 5,290 square bales and 278 round bales off of the 101.9 acres. So we had 264,500 pounds of squares, 361,400 pounds of rounds. That's using about a 1,300 pound average. And so when you put the squares and the round bales together, you have about 625,900 pounds of hay, which converts to 312.95 tons. And so if you have 312, let's do some math again. Overall, of all those acres, 312.95 tons roughly, over 101.9 acres, you're yielding about 3.07 tons per acre. Now, so that is the yields of this field. I have some goals in which I want to switch some of these rounds into squares, but we have to consider the capacity. And capacity is related to the farm place we have as well as the equipment we use. Okay, so that is an introduction to the fields we have. Now I have some ambitions and some goals in which I want to convert some of the round bales into square bales because of the higher profit margin. And in order to do that, we have to kind of look at my capacity as far as equipment and storage goes. So that's going to be in a video giving you a tour of the farm place as well as giving you an introduction to the equipment we use. And it'll give you a sense of like what our workload is and what our capacity is for two people, my dad and myself. And you got to consider I have a day job as well. And then I do some hobby stuff on the side. And then I do some things that are a complete waste of my time. But it's also my enjoyment. So you got to put that into a factor. You know, spending some days editing videos or photos, maybe that's not the most productive use of time, but it keeps me interested in other stuff. And speaking of that, if you want to check out My Air Nebraska, that's a website I use for posting aerial photography. It's a hobby I developed that it's not a huge money maker. I don't really push it very much. It's just something I do out of my own interest, and occasionally I sell some photos. And I'm going to start promoting it more on this channel because, well, if there's potential to raise money in which I can use it to buy some farm equipment or make some farm improvements, why not? Why not use my hobby to help finance my farm addiction? And I invite you to support that addiction by going to My Air Nebraska or myairimage.com. And you can see what kind of photos you like and feel free to comment on some of the stuff that you think is your favorite. And if there's a photo you want to order that isn't available in the print site, the My Air Image, you can't find a place to order the print, let me know and I'll get that thing posted so you can order it. All right, so that is the tour of the fields we use. Let's go on to the farm place.